They didn't even wait for us to leave the courtroom. The judge had just stepped down. People were standing, gathering their papers, already talking about New Year plans. My disabled son was holding his crutch, trying to move slowly through the aisle, when a woman in a red blazer stormed toward us, screaming about HOA rules. Before I could react, she grabbed my son by his jacket and dragged him across the marble floor like he was nothing. His crutch flew from his hand. His leg gave out, and his cry echoed through the courthouse as every head turned to watch. I remember freezing just for a second because my mind couldn't accept what my eyes were seeing. What that woman didn't know was this. In exactly 3 minutes, the power she thought she had would vanish, and her life would change forever. Before I take you back to what happened next, let me ask you something real for a moment. Right now, wherever you're watching this from, what city are you in? Are you in New York, Texas, California, Florida, or somewhere completely different? Go ahead and drop your city name in the comments. I read them, and it reminds me how many of us are out there watching, listening, and sharing these moments together. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel before the story continues. The stories you hear here aren't just about shock or drama. They're about real people, real pain, and the kind of moments that expose who we truly are when power is involved. Every story carries a message, and this one carries a warning. What happened that New Year's Day wasn't planned? We didn't wake up expecting confrontation, humiliation, or fear. We thought we were walking into a courthouse for a routine issue, something small, something administrative, something that would be over in minutes, so we could go home and start the year in peace. But sometimes the places meant to protect you become the places where you're tested the most. That woman didn't just cross a line. She shattered something inside my son. Inside me. And inside everyone who witnessed it and stayed silent. This story isn't about revenge. It's about consequences. It's about what happens when arrogance meets accountability and when someone mistakes authority for absolute power. So take a breath, stay with me, and listen carefully. Because what unfolded after that moment didn't just change our New Year's Day, it changed everything that came after. New Year's Day didn't feel like a holiday that morning. The sky was gray, heavy, like it couldn't decide whether to snow or rain, and the cold had a way of slipping through every layer of clothing no matter how thick it was. The courthouse stood there quiet and imposing, its stone walls cold to the touch, as if it had already chosen a side before anyone even walked through the doors. My son, Ethan, moved carefully beside me as we entered. Every step he took was measured. His right leg dragged just a little, the brace hidden under his pants stiffening his movement, while his left hand held tightly onto his crutch. He hated when people stared. So he kept his eyes down, focused on the polished floor tiles ahead of him. 16 years old, and already too familiar with pain, with judgment, with the way strangers could turn his body into a conversation without ever speaking to him. This won't take long. I told him quietly, more for myself than for him. We'll be home before noon. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He never did when courts were involved. The reason we were there felt ridiculous when spoken out loud. The Homeowners Association had filed a complaint against us. Again. This time, it was about Ethan's wheelchair ramp. According to them, it violated aesthetic guidelines and disrupted neighborhood uniformity. They had already fined us twice. When we refused to remove it, they escalated it to court. A ramp for a disabled child. That was the kind of year it had been. We sat on a hard wooden bench near the back of the courtroom. The room slowly filled with people. Lawyers in dark suits, couples whispering to each other, a few bored clerks flipping through folders. Somewhere behind us, someone laughed softly, talking about resolutions and parties from the night before. It felt wrong, like joy had wandered into a place it didn't belong. Ethan adjusted his grip on the crutch and leaned closer to me. "Dad, are they mad at me?" The question hit harder than anything the HOA had ever sent us in writing. "No," I said immediately. "This isn't your fault." Not even a little. He nodded again, but his shoulders stayed tense. Kids like Ethan grow up learning not to trust reassurance. They learn that adults say things to make themselves feel better, Not always, because they're true. The courtroom door opened sharply and the air shifted. She walked in like she owned the place. Red blazer, black slacks, high heels clicking against the floor, with purpose. Her hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place, and she carried a clipboard against her chest like it was a badge of authority. She didn't look around for a seat. She stood near the front, scanning the room, her eyes sharp and dismissive. I knew who she was before anyone said her name. The HOA Karen. I'd seen her before, at neighborhood meetings, standing behind a folding table, smiling without warmth as she explained fines and rules. She had a voice that could cut through a room, and a talent for making everything sound like a personal failure. She never called Ethan by his name. She called him the situation. Her eyes landed on us. She didn't smile. Ethan noticed too. His grip tightened on the crutch, and his leg bounced nervously. I felt a familiar anger rise in my chest, the kind that comes from watching someone you love brace for impact before anything has even happened. The judge entered and everyone stood. The room settled into a tense silence as the case was called. Karen stepped forward immediately, her heels clicking louder now, her voice confident and sharp as she began listing violations. Paint color, mailbox placement, and then the ramp. She referred to it as an unauthorized structure. She called it unnecessary. She said it set a bad precedent. I watched Ethan's face as she spoke. He stared at the table in front of him, his jaw clenched, his ears burning red. To her, he wasn't a child. He wasn't a human being. He was a problem to be managed. When it was our turn to speak, I explained, calmly, clearly, doctor's letters, permits, medical necessity. I could hear my own voice echoing in the room, steady but strained, like a rope pulled too tight. The judge listened, asked questions, nodded. Then came the ruling. Several of the HOA's claims were dismissed immediately. The judge made it clear that accommodations for a disabled minor were protected, not optional. The ramp was allowed. The fines were put on hold. For a moment, just a moment, I felt relief. Karen's face changed. The tight smile vanished. Her jaw hardened. She scribbled something aggressively on her clipboard, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look at the judge again. She looked at us. Court was adjourned. People began standing, gathering their things, the tension breaking into low conversations. I reached for Ethan's arm to help him up. He moved slowly, carefully, making sure his crutch was stable before putting weight on his leg. "We're done," I whispered. "Let's go." We stepped into the aisle. That's when I felt it, that feeling you get right before something goes wrong. Like the air itself tightens, like the room leans forward, waiting. Behind us, heels clicked fast. Too fast. I turned just in time to see her charging toward us, her face twisted with fury, her mouth already opening to shout. And before I could say a word, before security could react, before anyone could stop her, she reached out and grabbed my son, and everything shattered. For a split second, my brain refused to process what was happening. Her hand was on my son's jacket, not just touching him, gripping him. Fingers twisted into the fabric near his collar, pulling hard enough that his shoulders jerked backward. Ethan gasped, a sharp, frightened sound that cut straight through the low noise of people leaving the courtroom. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping forward. But she was already moving. "You don't walk away from me," she screamed, her voice cracking through the room like a whip. "This isn't over." Ethan's crutch slipped from his hand. It hit the marble floor with a loud clatter, spinning once before sliding away. Without it, his balance was gone. His injured leg buckled under him as she dragged him 2 steps back toward her, his shoe scraping helplessly against the floor. "Stop. Please stop." Ethan cried. He wasn't crying for himself. I knew that voice. He was crying because everyone was watching. People froze. Some stood with their coats half on, others with phones already raised, recording before their minds could catch up to what their eyes were seeing. A woman near the aisle covered her mouth. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God!" I lunged forward, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Let go of him." Karen didn't even look at me. Her face was flushed, eyes wild, lips pulled back as she ranted. HOA rules apply to everyone, she yelled. You think you're special? You think he gets exceptions? With one final yank, Ethan's leg gave out completely. He went down hard. The sound his body made when it hit the floor was dull and heavy, like something breaking that couldn't be fixed. His knee struck first, then his hip, then his shoulder. He cried out in pain, a raw, broken sound that echoed off the courtroom walls. I dropped to my knees beside him instantly, my hands shaking as I tried to shield him from her, from the stairs, from the phones. Don't touch him. I shouted. She finally stepped back, but not because she cared, because security was moving in now. Slow but deliberate, uncertainty written all over their faces as they tried to understand what they'd just witnessed. Karen pointed at Ethan like he was evidence. This is what happens, she yelled, when people think rules don't apply to them. I wrapped my arms around my son, feeling his body trembling against mine. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, tears streaming down his cheeks. Not loud sobs, just quiet, humiliating tears that soaked into my sleeve. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry, Dad. Those words broke something inside me. Don't, I said softly, forcing my voice to stay steady. You didn't do anything wrong. She laughed, a short, bitter sound that made several people gasp. If he can't handle walking like everyone else, she snapped, maybe he shouldn't live in that neighborhood. The room went dead silent. Even the judge, who had already begun to leave, stopped and turned back around. His face darkened, disbelief clear in his eyes. Ma'am, the judge said sharply, that is completely inappropriate. But she didn't stop. You coddle people, she continued, pacing now, her heels striking the floor angrily. You let them break rules, and then everyone else pays the price. Property values drop. Standards disappear. Security finally stepped between us. Ma'am, you need to calm down, one officer said, holding his hands out. She shrugged him off. I have authority here. Not like this, you don't, another officer replied. Ethan winced as he tried to move. I could see the pain in his eyes now. Real, physical pain layered on top of the humiliation. His knee was already swelling, the skin flushed and angry. A paramedic was called. The clerk's voice trembled as she spoke into the phone, glancing between Ethan and Karen like she couldn't believe this was real. Karen was escorted several steps away, but she kept yelling, her voice bouncing off the walls, filling every corner of the room. You'll regret this, she screamed at me. I know where you live. That threat sent a chill through my spine. Sir, one of the security officers said quietly to me, are you okay? I shook my head. My son needs help. The paramedic arrived quickly, kneeling beside us with calm efficiency. He asked Ethan questions, checked his leg, tried to distract him with gentle conversation. Ethan answered in whispers, his eyes fixed on the floor. I felt exposed. Every whisper, every stare, every phone lens pointed in our direction. This wasn't just pain. This was public humiliation. Karen stood near the exit now, arms crossed, breathing heavily, her confidence returning as she watched the chaos she'd created. She smirked when she noticed people recording. Go ahead, she said loudly. Let them see what happens when you break the rules. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lunge at her. Instead, I stayed where I was, holding my son's hand as the paramedic wrapped his knee and helped him sit up carefully. You did nothing wrong, I repeated, over and over. For him. For myself. The judge ordered the courtroom cleared. People began filing out, buzzing with shock, murmurs following us like a wave. As they helped Ethan into a chair, I glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:57 a.m. 3 minutes before noon. Karen was still arguing with security near the doors now, waving her clipboard, demanding names, threatening lawsuits. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. She had no idea that in exactly 3 minutes, everything she believed about power, authority, and control was about to collapse right in front of her. And when it did, there would be no clipboard in the world that could save her. Time doesn't always move forward the way you expect it to. Sometimes it stretches. Sometimes it slows down until every sound feels louder every movement heavier, every second painfully clear. I kept glancing at the clock on the wall without realizing I was doing it. 11:57 a.m. The paramedic finished wrapping Ethan's knee and asked if he felt dizzy. Ethan shook his head, but his hands were still trembling. I stayed close, one arm around his shoulders, the other resting on his back, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing slowly steady. Across the room, Karen hadn't stopped. She paced near the courthouse doors, her heels clicking back and forth like a metronome counting down something she couldn't hear. She was on her phone now, her voice sharp and fast, her free hand cutting through the air as she spoke. "This is harassment," she snapped. "Yes, I want Ames." "No, they don't have the right." She glanced over at us and rolled her eyes like we were inconveniences instead of victims. Security stood nearby, unsure what to do next. The judge had ordered the room cleared, but something about the situation had stalled everything. No one wanted to be the one to let her walk away. No one wanted to make the wrong call. Ethan leaned closer to me and whispered, "Dad, are we in trouble?" "No," I said firmly. "You're not in trouble. You hear me?" He nodded, but his eyes were still wide. Kids know when adults are pretending to be calm. 11:58 a.m. The courtroom doors opened again. 2 police officers stepped inside. Their presence shifted the air. Instantly, conversations stopped. Security straightened. Karen turned, her posture changing as if she'd been waiting for this moment. She smiled. Not a happy smile. A confident one. "Finally," she said loudly, snapping her phone shut. "About time someone showed up." She walked toward them like she was the one in charge, already talking, already controlling the narrative. "These people assaulted me," she claimed. "I was enforcing HOA regulations and was attacked." One of the officers glanced past her, to Ethan sitting in a chair, his leg wrapped, his face still streaked with dried tears. The officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we'll get to you in a moment." Her smile flickered. 11:59 a.m. Another man entered behind the officers. He wasn't in uniform. Dark coat, plain clothes, badge clipped to his belt, visible but not flashy. He moved with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from not needing to announce authority. He scanned the room once. Then his eyes landed on Ethan, then on me. And in that instant my breath caught. I knew him. My older brother. Ethan's uncle. He hadn't told me he was coming to court. He'd said he might stop by later, maybe surprise Ethan for New Year's lunch if everything went smoothly. Instead, he'd walked into a nightmare. He took in the scene, quickly, the chair, the bandage, the scattered crutch still lying where it had fallen earlier. His jaw tightened, but his face stayed controlled. He walked straight to the judge, who had remained nearby, clearly unsettled by what had happened. They spoke quietly, too quietly for anyone else to hear. But whatever my brother said made the judge's expression change instantly from concern to something sharper, something serious. Karen noticed. Her eyes narrowed as she watched them. "Who is that?" she demanded loudly. No one answered her. My brother turned around, and this time he didn't look at me. He looked at her. The room felt like it stopped breathing. "Ma'am," he said, evenly, "I'm going to need you to step away from the exit." She laughed, loud and dismissive. "And who are you supposed to be?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He unclipped his badge just enough for her to see it clearly. Her face drained of color. "I'm with the state," he continued, "and I just witnessed an assault on a disabled minor." Silence slammed into the room. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her confidence wavered, then snapped back like a reflex. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed. "I was provoked. I was enforcing regulations. I have authority." My brother nodded once, as if acknowledging a point in a conversation that had already ended. "Authority doesn't allow physical contact," he replied, "especially not like that." He gestured subtly to the officers. "Ma'am," one officer said, stepping forward, "turn around." Karen took a step back. "You can't be serious." "Turn around," the officer repeated. Her voice rose. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," my brother said calmly. "You're someone who just committed a crime in a courthouse." The words hit her like a slap. She tried to argue. She tried to interrupt. She tried to reclaim control, but it was gone. The officer took her arm. Handcuffs came out. The metallic click echoed through the room. Sharp, final, unforgettable. People gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Karen's clipboard slipped from her fingers and hit the floor, papers spilling everywhere. HOA letters, fine notices, threats printed neatly on official letterhead. All useless now. As they cuffed her, she finally looked scared. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "You don't understand what you're doing." My brother met her gaze. "I understand exactly what I'm doing," he said, "and so does the law." 12 p.m. Noon. Exactly 3 minutes after the clock had read 11:57. Karen was escorted past us toward the exit, her heels no longer clicking confidently, her head lowered, her words tumbling out in desperate protests. No one was listening to any more. Ethan watched quietly. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just leaned into me and whispered, "Is it over?" I looked down at my son, hurt, shaken, but still here. "Yes," I said softly. "It's over." But what neither of us knew yet was this. That arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The courthouse didn't feel the same after she was taken away. The noise slowly returned, murmurs, hurried footsteps, phones buzzing as people replayed what they had just witnessed. But there was a heaviness in the air now, like everyone understood they hadn't just seen an argument or a bad day. They had seen something deeper crack open. My brother came over to us as soon as Karen disappeared through the doors. He knelt in front of Ethan, keeping his voice low and steady. "Hey, buddy, how bad does it hurt?" Ethan shrugged slightly, wincing as he shifted. "It's sore, but I'll be okay." My brother nodded, his jaw tight. "You were very brave." Ethan didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, processing everything in his own quiet way. That's when my brother stood up and looked at me. "I need to tell you something," he said. "This wasn't random." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. "Her HOA has been on our radar for months." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. He explained it slowly, carefully, like he was opening a door that couldn't be closed again. Complaints had been filed. Not just one or two, but dozens. Disabled residents harassed. Fines issued for wheelchair ramps. Reserved parking spots revoked. Access paths blocked. All under the excuse of uniformity and community standards. Karen's name kept appearing in every report. She wasn't just enforcing rules, my brother said. She was targeting people. I looked at Ethan, sitting there quietly with his leg wrapped, his crutch still lying on the floor nearby, like a discarded afterthought. The idea that this had been happening to others, to children, to elderly residents, to people who didn't have the energy or resources to fight back, made my stomach turn. What happens now? I asked. My brother exhaled slowly. Now it becomes official. Over the next few hours, the courthouse transformed into something else entirely. Statements were taken. Video footage was requested. Phones were collected. Witnesses asked to share recordings. The judge ordered a formal incident report on the spot, his earlier frustration replaced with visible anger. Karen's actions had crossed a line that couldn't be explained away by policy or paperwork. And once that line was crossed, everything connected. Within days, investigators began knocking on doors in our neighborhood. They spoke to families we barely knew. People who had kept their heads down for years, paying fines they couldn't afford, removing ramps they desperately needed, afraid of retaliation. One elderly man confessed he'd stopped using his wheelchair outside because he didn't want to cause problems. A mother broke down in tears describing how her autistic daughter had been mocked during HOA meetings. Every story sounded different. Every story felt the same. Karen's behavior wasn't an exception. It was a pattern. The HOA board tried to distance themselves from her at first. Emails were sent, statements released. Phrases like isolated incident and misunderstanding appeared everywhere. But the evidence didn't care about excuses. Security footage from the courthouse went public. The videos taken by bystanders spread fast, shared, reposted, slowed down, zoomed in. People watched her grab Ethan. People heard her words. The outrage was immediate. News stations picked it up. Disability rights organizations demanded answers. Lawyers started making calls, and then the records came out. Emails from Karen threatening residents. Internal HOA notes referring to disabled homeowners as liabilities. Fines issued selectively, always to the same types of people. The board's silence broke. Resignations followed, one by one. The HOA that once ruled our neighborhood with fines and fear unraveled in weeks. Karen lost her position first, then her professional license, then the protections she thought would shield her from consequences. Charges were filed. Assault, discrimination, civil rights violations. The courtroom incident became Exhibit A, but it wasn't the only one. Through it all, Ethan stayed quiet. He didn't want to watch the videos. He didn't want to talk to reporters. He didn't want his name mentioned anywhere. What he wanted was simple. "I just want to feel normal again," he told me one night, sitting on the edge of his bed. I sat beside him. Normal isn't something someone else gets to decide for you. He looked at me then, really looked at me. Why was she so angry at me? I didn't answer right away, because the truth was ugly. "She wasn't angry at you," I said finally. "She was angry that you existed in a way she couldn't control." That answer seemed to settle somewhere deep inside him. As the investigation continued, settlements were offered. Policies were rewritten. Accessibility standards were enforced, properly, legally, without cruelty. The ramp stayed. Not just ours. All of them did. But justice, I learned, doesn't heal everything. Ethan still flinched when strangers raised their voices. He avoided crowded spaces. He asked me to walk beside him even when he didn't need help. The world had taught him a lesson it never should have. And yet, something else was happening too. He was watching adults apologize, watching systems change, watching someone who once terrified him lose everything she thought made her powerful. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Ethan spoke up softly. "Dad, yeah. Do you think, if she hadn't done that to me, this would have ever stopped?" I thought about the families, the fines, the silence. "No," I admitted. "I don't think it would have." He nodded slowly, absorbing that weight. And in that moment, I realized something painful and powerful at the same time. What happened to my son was wrong, but because it happened, because it was seen, because it was impossible to ignore, it changed far more than just our lives. And the cost of that change was something we were still learning to carry. The weeks after the courthouse felt longer than the day itself. Once the noise faded, the cameras, the investigators, the neighbors whispering behind curtains, what remained was the quiet. And in that quiet, the real damage showed itself. Ethan stopped sleeping through the night. He'd wake up suddenly, heart racing, convinced he was back on that marble floor again. Sometimes he wouldn't say anything at all. He'd just sit up in bed, gripping the edge of the mattress like he needed to anchor himself to something real. Other times he'd call for me in a small, shaky voice that made my chest tighten before I even reached his door. I kept the hallway light on after that. At school, things weren't the same either. Word had spread fast. Some kids were kinder than before, careful with their words, unsure of what to say. Others stared too long. A few asked questions that felt more like curiosity than care. Did it hurt? Was she really arrested? Are you famous now? Ethan hated all of it. He started asking to stay home. At first just one day, then another. He said his knee hurt, then his head. Then he just said, "I don't want people looking at me." So we talked. Long conversations at the kitchen table. Late nights on the couch. Quiet car rides where no one filled the silence, because sometimes silence was safer than words. "I feel weak," he admitted one night, staring at his hands. "Everyone saw me fall." I shook my head. "They saw someone hurt you. That's not weakness." "But I couldn't stop her," he said. "I couldn't do anything." That was the hardest part, because no matter how many times I told him the truth, that he shouldn't have had to stop her, that it was never his responsibility, I knew the world had already planted a cruel idea in his mind. That strength meant standing tall, that falling meant failing. Healing didn't happen all at once. It came in small, uneven steps. The first time he agreed to go back into a public building, he held my arm the entire time. His grip was tight, knuckles white, like he was afraid the ground might give way again. I didn't pull away. I didn't tell him he was fine. I stayed. We went to therapy, not because something was wrong with him, but because something wrong had been done to him. The therapist never rushed him, never pushed. She let him tell the story in his own time, in his own words. Some days he said nothing at all. Other days he talked for an hour. And slowly, something shifted. He stopped apologizing for existing. He stopped blaming his body. He started asking questions, not about what happened, but about what it meant. Why do people hate what they don't understand? He asked once. I didn't have a perfect answer. Maybe no one does. Outside our home, changes were happening too. The HOA meetings were different now. Quieter, carefully worded. New faces, new rules. Real rules this time, written with accessibility in mind instead of excuses. People who had once stayed silent began speaking up. One neighbor brought us cookies and admitted she'd been fined for helping her husband build a small ramp years earlier. Another thanked Ethan for standing up, even though he never chose to. Ethan didn't know how to respond to praise. I didn't do anything, he said. I told him, sometimes doing nothing wrong is enough to expose what's wrong. The day he went back to the courthouse surprised me. It wasn't required. There was no hearing he needed to attend. He just asked one morning, quietly, "Can we drive by there?" We parked across the street. He sat in the car, watching people go in and out, the same stone steps, the same doors. "That's where it happened," he said. "Yes," I replied. He took a deep breath. I thought I'd never want to see it again. But I don't want it to own me either. That was the moment I realized how much he'd grown. Not stronger in the way people like to brag about, stronger in a quieter, truer way. Later that month, he spoke at a small community meeting. Nothing formal. No cameras. Just a room full of people sitting in folding chairs. His hands shook at first, but his voice didn't. He talked about ramps, about fear, about how humiliating it feels when adults argue over your right to exist like it's a debate. He didn't accuse. He didn't attack. He just told the truth. When he finished, the room was silent. Then people stood, not all at once, not dramatically, one by one. In the car afterward, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes. "That was scary," he said. "I know." But it felt lighter, he added, like I gave something back. Healing, I learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming. Ethan still had bad days. Still flinched sometimes when voices got loud. Still needed reassurance more than other kids his age. But he also laughed more. Walked a little taller. Spoke a little louder when it mattered. The world hadn't become kinder overnight. But he had learned something powerful. That dignity doesn't come from standing without support. It comes from knowing you deserve it, even when you need help to stay upright. And as I watched my son find his footing again, I understood something else too. Justice might expose the truth, but healing is what allows you to live with it. And we were finally moving forward. Time has a strange way of turning moments into lessons. At first, what happened in that courthouse felt like a single, terrible incident. One woman, one outburst, one life-altering afternoon. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to see it differently. That moment wasn't an accident. It was a mirror, a reflection of how easily power can turn cruel when it goes unchecked, and how quietly suffering can be ignored when it's inconvenient. Karen thought rules made her important. She thought authority meant control. She believed a title on a clipboard gave her the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. But the truth is, power without empathy is nothing more than permission to harm. What shook me the most wasn't just what she did to my son. It was how close she came to getting away with it. How many people hesitated. How many watched before stepping in. How normal it had all become for someone like her to speak loudly, act boldly, and assume no one would challenge her. Ethan asked me once, weeks later, why didn't anyone stop her right away? I didn't have a clean answer. Because the truth is uncomfortable. People are often taught to respect authority without questioning it, to avoid conflict, to stay out of things that don't involve them directly. And in that silence, cruelty finds room to breathe. What changed everything that day wasn't just a badge or a uniform. It was visibility. People saw, people recorded, people couldn't look away. And once the truth was exposed, it refused to stay quiet. I think about all the families who came forward afterward, the ones who had suffered quietly, paid fines they couldn't afford, removed ramps they desperately needed, changed their lives to avoid confrontation. Not because they were wrong, but because they were tired. Tired of fighting systems that weren't built for them. Tired of explaining their existence. Tired of being treated like exceptions instead of human beings. Ethan carries that knowledge with him now, not as a burden, but as awareness. He understands something most people don't learn until much later in life, that dignity isn't granted by rules or titles. It's inherent, and anyone who tries to take it from you reveals far more about themselves than about you. He also learned that strength doesn't always look like standing your ground. Sometimes it looks like surviving. Sometimes it looks like asking for help. Sometimes it looks like speaking up when your voice is shaking and your hands won't stop trembling. And sometimes strength looks like choosing kindness even after the world has shown you its ugliest side. I've replayed that moment in my mind more times than I can count. The grab, the fall, the sound of my son hitting the floor. I wish I could erase it. I wish I could protect him from ever feeling that small again. But I can't change what happened. What I can do is carry the lesson forward. If you see someone being mistreated, especially someone vulnerable, don't assume someone else will step in. Don't wait for permission. Don't tell yourself it's not your place. It is, because injustice doesn't announce itself as evil. It disguises itself as policy, as procedure, as just following the rules. And if you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong because of your body, your ability, your circumstances, hear this clearly. You are not the problem. You never were. The problem is a world that mistakes control for order and cruelty for strength. What happened to my son changed him. It changed me. And it changed our community in ways I never expected. But more than anything, it taught us that silence is a choice, and it's one that always favors the wrong side. So, if this story stays with you, let it stay for the right reasons. Let it remind you to speak, to notice, to protect, because real power isn't about enforcing rules. It's about protecting people. And once you understand that, everything changes. If this story stayed with you, don't just scroll away. Like this video, so more people can see what happens when power is abused and when accountability finally shows up. Subscribe to the channel if you believe stories like this matter, because every story here is told to expose truth, protect dignity, and remind us we're not alone. Now, I want to hear from you. What city are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments, and tell me, have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and wished you'd spoken up? Your comment matters more than you think. Your voice helps these stories reach people who need them. And if this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness should never be optional. Stay with us. More stories are coming.